Jene dungun jeje senjir Nede toga lebonzin Kanda zebe zeramare Nondon donga jezere Dronzo gola boje darze Yela droju yande Droda jero nyamanyelu Lenye jandro dronze Mare munze donga nyugu Jene jode raldena Dene daje taje tarzu Yerde lüzu jaze duvegu Chuda chudan chuni jendre Tane munzel jam Yala maramadana Marabazanandi Senden Jeje Jeravasere Tale de Mumbarabzane Kada Denje Jolo Dobai Lord Bobe Nawan Zandozo Kanze Dawar de Ba Shonsen Chewar de Naya Kombo Jamyan de Nini Keme Baryan Don Wareshu Wonla So Tini Namge Dana Nibe Semjen Tamje Sanje Ju Gobar Boche Lang Gobar Cha Te Chedu Hini Tambi Che Ye Tuasam Komsum Ye Kone Nyam Salambar Kiyo Nyambe Kolong Ye Kone Saldambe Sembar Shu Tela Kangje Sembar Jawe Che Ye Remba Te La Ni Kada Tenju Nye Yubi Na Ne Hini Kane Kyache Long Ne Chang Ma Wa Yindu Teta Ji Kongbe Ne Tamje Tsulan Du Shaba De Hini Tenju La Ra Le Yure Tenju La Te Ne Kai Kongba De Toko Ba Yin Zang Hini Tenju La Tuasam Je Kuku Yure Hini Tenju Te La Teni Teno Sum Yude Ki Kondel De Zambi Tenju Changi Milamba Mangbo Yubi Na Ne Tanda Ngombe Tenju Ki Kondel De Zambi Tenju Re Tela Teni Kyar Pabe Yuldu Chungbi Lulubin Namji Zebi Tenju Mangbo Yure Pe La Ni Chunsha Pe Kepa Namji Zebi Tenju Mangbo Yubi Na Ne Ta Tanda Kunje Mevaru Muje Shangan Zebi Teba Chechung Yongzo Ngombe Ki Kongne Tamji Chigri Dusha Pe Tenju Kepe Sula Chubingo Ta Dini Re Dini Shuala Ta Nechu Domche Soso Yanta Bariba Hiwi Na Ne Nechu Na Ne Ne Keba Temba Ruwa Temba Ma Ne Ta Kashi YouTube Je Tana Nganzo Kunjungi Temba De La Lepte Yure Di Kazangi Chwe Tene Kale Ma Shugi
At the beginning of class, please give rise to bodhicitta, the wish to attain perfect and complete awakening and to establish all sentient beings who are as numerous as the sky is vast at the level of perfect and complete Buddhahood. And with that in mind, then engage in your practice of putting the teachings into practice through studying, contemplation, and meditation. So, with that in mind, the text that we're studying falls into one of the two main categories, Sutra and Shastra. The teachings in the Sutra section they're extremely vast, and there are many quotes and so forth. And in order to really understand the meaning of that, we rely primarily on the commentaries on the Shastras. And based on that, then we need to really also study, reflect, and meditate on the teachings that we find condensed in and explained, elaborated upon in the commentaries. Specifically, there are numerous commentaries on the Buddha's teachings, really so many that fall into the categories of Sutra, of Vinaya Sutra and Abhidhamma. Here, our text is concerned with the Abhidhamma, and many Panditas in India have written commentaries that fall into the category of the Abhidhamma. And likewise, many Tibetan scholars have also written numerous works on the Abhidhamma. Our text here condenses the intent of the Buddha's teachings in terms of Abhidhamma, of all those different directions, condenses the intent of the Mahayana Abhidhamma as well as the Shravaka Abhidhamma. And so the text that does that is the gateway to knowledge. And the structure of the gateway to knowledge is around the 10 topics of expertise, the 4 seals of Dharma, and the fourfold correct discrimination. Within the 10 topics of expertise, we have reached the 8th one, which is the topic of the truths. And in the discussion there, we find a discussion of the 4 noble truths, out of which we have covered some aspects, some explanations already. We're currently discussing the truth of origin, and we'll continue now from where we have left off yesterday. Can I kick you guys?
Ani Gombe Lamji Pangja Mimba ni Tonam Toba Yenje Ye Gyup Nyomong Tenje Kahashi Tongwe Pangor Chawa Mimba Namso Sonando Tadi Ngomba Kundi Yulu Shirsha Ranredwa Gazana Kazan Ngomba Zoji Lola Zoji Lola Kundi Yulu Di Tongpang La Chabra Yobana Shin Kombang La Chabra Yobana Kazan Tongbang Shebi Kapso Tongba in the Nyomba in Bechap, second day Momba Zorwa. Tomba in the Nyomba in Machap 7 day, Mombakundi in Ba. That the Momba Zern, the Komba Chavajina, Kombang in the Nyomba in Machap Serian. Kombang Ina Nyomba Takanda send the same Jun Serwa, Jinaba in Machap, Nyomba. 당 녀몽체 마인비 제가 된서 상마 건배방 워차와 인사 대 뭐마 저기로래 다군두기 녀몽 실자 제가 이나 나도 방제 자단지 가서 자동 숨조 소제 가성 지용도와 숨조 섭시에 남나다 니주자제 남나다 디온도 단 제가 이나 아니 통망이나 녀몽 바인베 차라고요래 어느 류가지 내년엔진조 아니 방자 말해베 라마 아니 다 파고라 르nga de nengen yo mare sala buire ngombasu kundu gyurula. Soso jewa negamna lunga ji nengan yore ti thonam tobi gauso pangsa ware. Pakpi kansala lu nga mi thongde kapsu ta nengan lenda oda mi ringwa denda thong seji rede pakpa kwarangi ngone samla dana deyo rasana yo marayas. Nyumang wana pakpa la lunga ji nengan lengi kyu nyumang ba meba rebe la na de mare. Kyu nyumang ba yore de nyumang ba kunda pangsa ware. Lenje de la nengan leng tukja denda lebi ji nyuba yo mare. Lengan ba saya ji nyuba de ko zogju lhal te yore ma doma kwarangi le saya nyuba de peche peche meba chazarwa. Dengdang pakpala lunga di nengi lengi pangcha me sim ta xiechi tripa yore dik tang yomara lunga xiechi tripa da yore wa yang xeba rang re, sim rang re nyomongpa tripa yore tang yomara nyomongpa tripa ta kasang gombang danda tangma ta gombang kor ku danda rembe rembe soso soso danda gogal danda rembe la te yore wa dende zing zogi lola lunga di le dendo tongma mar gombang la re sikire gombang kapla yores des me dauro je chadu kudwa awesome.
We are on page 137, paragraph 1002. The discards by means of the path of cultivation are all those not discarded by the path of seeing, that is, any innate aspect of disturbing emotions in the stream of being of one whose attainment surpasses the path of seeing. The undefiling are not to be discarded. So here again we follow directly the explanation or the tradition of the Abhidhamma Samujaya and not that of the Abhidhamma Kosha. So when we look at the words here, it really reflects the position of the Abhidhamma Samujaya. We already spoke a little bit about the difference between the two traditions in terms of the path of seeing. We said that there were some points in which these two traditions were not in accord. And likewise, that also leads to differences in how the path of cultivation is then looked at. So we said that on the path of seeing, according to the Abhidhamma Kosha, the discards necessarily need to be afflictive emotions. It's only afflictive emotions that are discards on the path of seeing, while according to the Abhidhamma Samujaya, it is not necessarily the case that it's only afflictive emotions that are being abandoned, that are discards on the path of seeing. There are other things included in that which is abandoned on the path of seeing as well. And then this likewise affects the way that the path of cultivation is seen, actually. So according to the Abhidhamma Kosha, the discards of the path of cultivation are not necessarily only the afflictive emotions. So not only the aspects of mind and mental states, we can say. So they're not only mental, but there are also other aspects that are to be discarded on the path of cultivation. While the Abhidhamma Samujaya takes here really the afflictions, the obscurations as the basis. So whether we enumerate the 138 or the 128 discards according to the Abhidhamma Samujaya, if you take that as the basis for what needs to be abandoned on the path of cultivation, actually that does not include the negative actions of the body and speech, because those have already been abandoned with the abandonment of the imputed afflictions on the path of seeing. According to the Abhidhamma Samujaya, the negative actions of body and speech as well as the negative results of the lower rebirths, are already all eliminated on the path of seeing. So all that is left on the path of cultivation is then to get rid of the inherent aspects of the afflictions. And so from the perspective of the realized bodhisattva themselves, even though actions might look bad from an outward onlooker's perspective, from the perspective of the realized bodhisattva themselves, actually there are no negative actions because there are no new actions that are motivated through the disturbing emotions that are based on the grasping to the self. So even though from an outward perspective it might look as if the bodhisattva would engage in negative action, those actions, because the according afflictions have been eliminated, do not have the potential to propel negativity anymore, or does not accumulate negative actions anymore. So only that which is left, that which has been accumulated previously, need to be eliminated now, and no new negative karma is being accumulated by that realized bodhisattva. And so if we ask ourselves what is left here, or what the bodhisattva on the path of cultivation needs to abandon, those are really they have some cognitive obscurations left that need to be abandoned, and then the afflictive obscurations, but those co-emergent aspects, or the hidden aspects that have been accumulated, like that are the habitual tendencies from previously, that have been previously accumulated. So those aspects are still to be abandoned, but the actions of the manifest and imputed aspects of the afflictions, as well as the actions of body and speech and so on, they have already been abandoned. So they are not discards on the path of cultivation according to the Abhidhamma Samuccaya.
ane da pangja minba ne same to sonsha yore. Chide da kondo nyomo ba da thekwa chungpo ngomba kundu yu gongpa la samado na nyomo ba treba chigbo pangja re ane sheche treba pangja mahimbe samlam na ane ngomba gongpa nula nyomo ba da sheche treba niga pangja yin ka re wana tana diru tongbang shibi kapsu sheche treba karijin ma sha ba re lamna nanda 통방나 고마가라 녀몽 시르자지는 게 제시기요래. 녀몽 시르자지는 게 제시기요 인상 아니 시제들 버니 남자는 마셔라 마도 시제들 방 메뉴 받아 방미쳐 받아 되는 거 뭐 군도지 공부 많이 받는데 말아. 공부 군도지 공부라 시제들 봐 군다 제자데 통방이 마다 현재 제자데 공방이 봐. 근데 공부 군도지 공부 이발로 대좀 개요 말해. 아니 지제 다들 방자 멤버도나 아니 다 삭제 녀몽 바당 된수다 시제제 발든도데 방지 예 가지 아니 다 방지 멤버들 가르려면 사메 제쳐라 다 딩omba 조군이 제발 가야게 말어 니게 계지시 그래 방지 멤버들 나 사메 라야서 근데 다 사메도 방자 걸어 말어 와고 사바세 비데 예셰제랑신 인도 고 연den기 뭐래 솔라 랑자래 되래 아니 다 사제 되저데 방자래 되래 녀몽부 녀고래 되래 누가 과시 시제들 뭐 인고 요래 아니 하나 넘버즈 당 대부 중화당 다 가서 그래 된도기 로라 디바이나 녀몽진지 디바이 배 차브레베에서 제와당와이나 차브 말해서 그래 녀몽진 많이 배 디바 요요서는 데 넘버즈 당 된전나라 양송나 제라 시즈 좀 발라서 바나라 송도 요래 다 다디 간제로 송 요래서 좀된 산제 좀된 데라 대신나 용도 되는 송으로 와 산제 세주잖아 제바 땐도 방와 쓰기래 땐지 제바 용서 방와래서 어느 땐 라고 봐도 세디 가르던 거래 세디 레빈도잖아 년도 자좀 받아 란자 자좀 봐 제바 방와 인 레데 땐도 방 쓰는데 많이 어느 땐도 방와 많이 컨솔 제바 하마 가르 방만디 봐 가르 학대 요래 남는 거죠 전주기 용이고 데발에 시비 가서 거도 되는 시야죠 봐 미셰비 주시서 근저 봐 내제가 봐 미셰바 두제가 봐 미셰바 아니 교통에 제 두통에 미셰바 산제지 취랍도 뭐 미셰바 서근저 용어 봐
Sumba karere?
교통에 제 두통에 그래서 맞아지 동지라 아니 저를 교망부 좀 해라 쓰려 봐 어디 교통에 제 두통에 좀 미셰바 아니 타마드 산지 저랍도 뭐 미셰바라 톱주 미제바시 마데바죠 야라서 봐 되게 뭐 랑제 거란나나 베스트 베살고 요래 된소 노베니니 제베 뭐 저랑제 나라 왔다 된데 사우 슈주 송낭도와 딩조데다 년도다 랑자 자주만은 게 빵요 말에 데 제바라다 말에는 레스 녀몽 제바라다 말에는 마이 녀몽체 마이 비 제바데 예 선데네 송고 다 시지 제바서 식탄이 데 베저당데 니에디 때 콤보로지다 딱 콤보 조진 저지 니 되는 나라 시지 제바로지 즉 베저당고 되는 도마도 영자라 녀몽체 마이 비 제바서 되네 송고요래 나 빵자래다 말은 빵자래 근데 릉아지 자와든전에 녀몽기 제바가로 말아와 소주 마진랑 디꾸롱들 녀몽 제바래데 소주바도 만질랑 하나 녀몽진지 제바래 녀몽진지 제바가 말해 나 빵자지로 와 디디니 오늘 시제 제바라서 시제 제바 양을랑 때스 갈아 가보래 시제 제바 대양 조셈로 와 혼니 디꾸는 레저래 쓰기래 또 되는 소리래서 나서
The last sentence in this paragraph here reads, the undefiling are not to be discarded. So maybe we have to emphasize this here different. The undefiling are not to be discarded. Because the question is now what is not to be discarded. The one category of phenomena, or the one category that is not to be discarded, are the undefiling phenomena or the undefiling aspects. So according to the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, there are afflictive obscurations and there are cognitive obscurations, and both of them need to be discarded. They're both discards. On the path of seeing, some aspects of them are being discarded, and then others on the path of cultivation. Why do we not see the cognitive obscurations mentioned here, though? It's because we're in the discussion of the afflictive obscurations. We are in the discussion of the disturbing emotions. So here we only explicitly speak about the afflictive obscurations and not about the cognitive obscurations. But that's just because of the context. That does not mean that the cognitive obscurations would not be something that needs to be abandoned, or that could not be abandoned, or that we didn't have the ability to abandon. No, the cognitive obscurations are equally important to be discarded. But here in our context, since we speak actually about the cognitive obscurations, they're not mentioned like that. So they're also to be abandoned. What is it then that doesn't need to be abandoned? It's only the undefiling. And at this point, actually, the Abhidhamma Kosha and the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, they're both on the same page. They both make the same point here. The undefiling is that which is of the nature of primordial wisdom. The undefiling is of a nature of the qualities. So that's not something that needs to be abandoned, but that's actually something to be adopted. So that's very clear here. Now, what is to be abandoned is then the opposite to the underfiling, which is the defiling. And that's what needs to be abandoned, right? And primarily we speak here about the disturbing emotions. And if we follow the tradition of the Abhidhamma Kosha and the Abhidhamma and the Shravakayana in general, then we actually need to acknowledge also that not all, that when we speak about the afflictive obscurations, they do not include all obscurations. So there is a distinction into obscurations that are afflictive emotions and obscurations that are non-afflictive. So they're not afflictive emotions or disturbing emotions. And so we find that very clearly mentioned in the Abhidhamma Kosha Bhasha, for example. How is it? How is that the case? Actually, we need to see that, well, for an arhat, it is important to eliminate all the afflictive emotions only. It is still acknowledged in the Shravakayana that there are other obscurations that are left, even if all afflictive obscurations are eliminated. And we see that when we consider the accomplishment of Buddhahood. When they describe the Buddha, then that is a state of having completely abandoned all disturbing emotions, having entirely and completely eliminated all obscurations. That's how it's defined. And why is here the emphasis given to that stably, completely, entirely elimination of all obscurations? It's because it's in comparison to the accomplishment of an arhat, where the afflictive obscurations might be completely eliminated, but there are some obscurations left that then constitute the difference between an arhat and a Buddha. So there are 4 things listed that an arhat does not know. So there's some things that the arhat is obscured from knowing that the Buddha is not. So there are obscurations that are not afflictive. And so there we speak about limitations in knowing of time, span, place, so distance, knowing the very subtleties of cause and effect. Here we give the example of an arhat not knowing what the particular causes individually are for every single speck of color in the tail feathers of a peacock. And then also there is some lack of knowledge with regard to the full accomplishment of a Buddha. So in terms of the 10 powers and the fearlessnesses and so on, there are some things that the arhats do not possess and comprehend. So an arhat doesn't need to abandon those last obscurations, but they are obscurations. And so usually they're called the non-afflictive obscurations. In most Shravakayana texts and most commentaries, they're just called the non-afflictive obscurations. They're obscurations, but they're not afflictive. So an arhat who has abandoned all afflictive obscurations still has those obscurations left. Only in 1 or 2 commentaries on the lower Abhidhamma tradition can we actually find the term cognitive obscurations for those. So on very rare occasion, you can find the term cognitive obscuration here. But we have to take that a little bit carefully when we compare it directly to what we understand as cognitive obscurations in the Mahayana. But usually, and the straightforward way of referring to it is just the non-afflictive obscurations. And so they constitute a discard for a Buddha, but not for an Arhat. And we have to be a little bit careful with those. We have to be, when we think of them as cognitive obscurations, because of the nature of because cognitive obscurations need to be of a mental nature and a kind of mental activity, and that does not correlate exactly to the one that to these non-afflictive obscurations. So we have to be a little bit careful in that point. Where did Kempola go? We lost Kempola. Try to call him again. Maybe I got a message just up.
So, Jarang la log do song jarang dam na ya.
Ngala log do maso.
Ale na so de jang ma do ya sa dai.
Ja, det tar en på det då.
Na las. Jarang ko ban chola mare.
An ka ban chola yo.
Ale la so. Ini na tenje samde la. Chedar pona nyomo ba te da kewe shidam. Nyomo ba rang ngo dam. Te nyemi chida wa shin yongsu shebe herabi nyomo ba te da jung war gyurwa tangdo melen bar chebe sa. Nazo denerwa ne nyomo ba da kanje jine pangore salabu ke jarwa. Da di nyomo ba de kunda da lenje shenje na yo mare ni 통방 당 공방지 현재 마셔 봐제 또 통방이나다 공방이나다 군다이나다 렌제이나다 녀모고 용조 간내지는 뽕그래 랍디잖아 알레 녀모데다 제위시 주강들에서 힘어마도 가상 가서 나타위네다 데네케지 lep소와 현반도 태좀다 다위네다 어딘서로와 디 다우다우치 초점지 군다지 자디 통방라 자르데 현재지 자데 공방라 야자르 저거래 로나 다오를 되래 된저데 녀몽뭐 대다께 시당 선된저와 안다 녀몽바랑게 뭐 세주잖아네 고 자고 녀몽바 니오 녀몽바 상가도 레레레지는 진심바래 아니 예와 나서 제바이는 통방 공부 뭔가지 랩사오로와 어 녀몽바 소소소소 뭐다 아니 제래 디제니 ngō chile ndē yam rāu kārī phōngtō gōrē, phāngtō gōrē, ndē nyēmik dō rō wā. Nō korwa dā nyā zōn lē, thārwa mējā bā lā sō bā nyēmik dō chedā wā shindō, yōng zī xie bē xērab jī yé sā. Tā yā kē, nyō mō bā rē xie sō na, tā pēntō chōmbō yōng gō rō wā. Kā yī sā na, nam yōn dēndē xie lō, dēndē sōng gōrē, kē bā mōng bā jē gē, nyōng pāng jā mī xie, pongwa lombra tsar sigire pangja khorang go masu bala ta nge di pang yi di pang yasan pangwa laba di 배 양사오지 말해 배서 양사오로 와서 알레 방제지 방공구유나 방제 그런 것이 보고 와 녀모바 방게요나 세지르바 방게요나 다 돈은 톱잖아 방제 가르가르 방이 무슨 라버체바이나 어디디디 방와래서 고 하고 보고 와서 또 밀레 시에나 마셔도 계속 가가래 시 고야서는 가요 말에 간다 소소 하고 보고 와서 나고요 디 덴데지 되네 샤랍지 원내 방제 녀모바 되는데 봐 도츠 디큐디 바디 무슨 디 네미 디 켄든도 야고 하고 버체네 그래 샤랍지 아니 용서 시비 샤랍지 녀모바 되다 중화 교와 당도 메는 버체니 다 녀모바 하고서 아니 어디 되샤라샤 디 나자르도 디 타도르도 디 싸우 녀모바라샤 디 녀 녀모바라도 싸우 녀모바 낭내 되는 가서 차제 주든도 차제 주람난다 주람난다 디디 여와 낭사쳐서 아니 고 디당데레도서는 아니 살보진 거서도 그도 와스 디 하고는 아니 다디 냠존나에 말에 디 방자르도 소소디 남도지 깨어다 낭는 무슨 제한 내려와요와 원에 녀몽 디케샤스 디 방자레도 아니 디지 주디르도 디들 내 제기매서 다 타정도 되고 그런도 당양고 람소소 소소도 되면 냠는 제다를 뭐뭐 뭐 용으로 와 딜라 타른도 저거고도 다가랑 맨도 저맨 나셔서나 메도 다가랑 람도 쿠르네니 뇽모 포인이 버텐 고고도 당 어디 갑도 갑고네 당도 메네 봐서 다 되네 되네 제베서 나서
So and now we continue with paragraph 103. How are they to be discarded? The discriminating knowledge that fully cognizes exactly as it is the basis that gives rise to these disturbing emotions. The individual identity of the disturbing emotions and their shortcomings makes it so that one does not eagerly engage in the arising of these disturbing emotions. So now the question is, how do we actually abandon those disturbing emotions? And here we don't distinguish anymore between the discards on the path of seeing, the discards on the path of cultivation, the co-emergent and the imputed afflictions. All of that is here the same. Anyways, as we have seen, we can correlate the imputed disturbing emotions with the discards on the path of seeing, and then the co-emergent aspects of those discards for the path of cultivation. But in any case, for all of the different discards, the point is really the same here. The idea is the same, that if we recognize these different aspects of the disturbing emotions, then we need to we will benefit from that. We will not engage in them. So we have looked at the disturbing emotions in a lot of detail already. We have identified their essence. We have identified the function of each of those. We have identified what the faults of them are. We have looked at the root afflictive emotions and the subsidiary afflictive emotions, the different ways of classifying them, the different ways of naming them based on their functions and so forth. And so if we want to get rid of the result of what these afflictive emotions bring about, then we need to know what the fault of those actually is, right? So what problematic results occur from them. And in order to know that, we need to know what these afflictive emotions are. So the discriminative wisdom that knows the afflictive emotions is here that which really helps to discard the afflictive emotions. It's extremely beneficial to know them, right? If we know them, we know what to abandon. We'll recognize them when they come up. There's a saying by the scholars if one doesn't know the discards, saying I will discard them is very surprising. This is to say that if we do not know what the discards are in the first place, if we do not know what the afflictive emotions are, then like saying I will abandon them doesn't really add up, right? In order to know what to refrain from, we need to recognize it when it arises in our mind. Then we can know what to stay clear of, or how to act, what antidotes to apply when those falls arise. So first of all, we need to know what the discards are. And without knowing them, we wouldn't be able to abandon them, actually. Because only when we know them, then we are able to be like, okay, this I have dealt with, or this has arisen in my mind, I have applied the antidote, and so on. We can be aware of the discards as they arise, and then we can also apply the antidote, we can uproot them, and so forth. It's not only to tell people afterwards, I have done this, this, and this. So it's not only about being able to express which discards one has abandoned. It's in the process of discarding them. If we don't know them, how are we supposed to do it? Because if we know them, we can identify them when they arise. When we can identify, this is a root disturbing emotion, this is a subsidiary afflictive emotion. These are the subtle developers. If I recognize them in their very subtle state, then I can probably prevent them from developing into big, big problems. And so if we know them, then we can know, this is actually one of my problem areas. This is what triggers these disturbing emotions. Then we can recognize them, we can avoid from acting upon them, we can avoid acting upon them, we can distance ourselves from the objects that give rise to the disturbing emotions in us, or that trigger our disturbing emotions, depending on where we are on the path, the different stages of the path. We might have to escape, we might have to distance ourselves from certain objects temporarily, or if we are able to do so, taking these adverse circumstances onto the path, so those triggers for the afflictive emotions, taking them onto the path and incorporating them in the practice. That all only is possible when we are actually able to recognize them, and for that we need this discriminating wisdom that fully cognizes the disturbing emotions. So
namje nyembo lam thomne nyomong nam dare kewe sabe nengene tsene jumde chi meteoran gyurbala mawa shejawos nan nyomo bangje ba ngoshe ne de neba meba soje tabje denzo tang ana dende jerem jenu da namje nyembo ke sidozana 자원에 매바소에 녀버 깨어들 거야래. 아주 단단 녹중 제박 당 퇴섬 집에 내가 녀모 버디디 뭐나 하 고도기로 와. 하고는 되는 내가 불미 집에 탑시지네 당도로 와. 딜라 녀버 양도 버실 말해. 안에 셔 녀버디. 자원에 매바소에 녀버들라 고고고요래. 나 동남 미시 줄라게 용도 녀모바 꼰다지 차 용조 방도로 와. 안 검남 레베 사고도 저 용도 아니 다단다 가서 대고 전부 유로 시작하러 와. 검남 사고도 저 레베 저 용도 아니 녀몽 바커라나 아니 락바든 종원나 타오도 저 첼라 레베지는 방도고 요래. 거든 녀모 예신 줄라 깨스도나 잠에 써야 되는 것들라 고고고요. 녀벌람 톱네. 아니 딱고 바르멜람 남돈람 니나네. 바르멜람 줄게 베고 녀벌람 마마데로 와. 베니 녀마샤데 몸바 누바 나신 녀마샤로 마마데 갑소다. Koje bangji nyomomba meba shakru goyore. O tene nyomomba namlar yang kiwe saban nengene tsene chom song shakduwa. Ta gare chine tsene chom meba shakare lamna tene ta ngomba kundu ki gomba shirshane yugoba indu. Debi nyomomba denzo meba reyasa, gaksa ware, chazang kapde meba in gabas. Maungba denzo majeba nyoba meba reyasa. Tanda nyembo dang osu treteba indu nyembo ngosu gyula kyeba yindu nyomomba ngaba meba reyasa. Chidi tuyusumdi nyomomba tamze kapde meba re. Ta teni meba chadu nyomomba tsawa nine kyegyo kogab. Korang ngogaldo gyuba nyomomba di kyegyo kogab tsane me sige yore. Ngomba ta kundu ki shirya lo shicharwa. Teni nengene tsene chumde chi mi kyewa gyurwa lo pang ta chima kyune kye me la gyurwa. Tongpa yinanda, koma yinanda. Kasa ngoma nga zo korla di korla la yinba. Tekwa chenpa lukla nyomba tenpa chi pang sawa chala. Yangjar kye sakanda wada sa ya rinpa dra sawa chala mala bab dra da sa sumba pakwa de teni kyen chi kashi mandra cha sa nipa la maa sa son sakanda wada. Sa tumba la yubi pakwa de kyen kari chi mandra sa chukpa la maa sa sakandi. Tekwa chenpa ki lukla kenen sawa nina chigiwa yu maa raya salabare. Wadi chi 미게 와르교로라 방선 답그래서 제가 균에 게미 통방이나다 공방이나다라 제가 제가 균에 매스라브레 하나 아니 가르서 그래 아 대과주 뭔가 군대기 로라 아니 맞아 소소기고 삼된 기타 수함라 다 수함라 소매칸라 되는데 저기 아니 내가 좀 뭐 건는다고 제가 와서 디토 건방도 방와서 라지 매배야 건방 민다 버sam게 방와 인겨를 막아 건방 엄마 방와서는 걔는 지금 매서 그래 딱 뭐뭐 저 가서 뭐 바꾼데 줄라 따디로와 하나다 뭐 저 줄라 단다 제시 집어지 그냥 경고에 배나나 집어지 그냥 경고 매서 그래 데 가상 기계제 텐션을 따다 차서 와저 통방이나 즉 말에 러미게 와라래 통방데 파버 톱사오지로 소소교로 사야잖아요 말에 되게 건방 기비값수 내나라 많이 쓰기래 공부는 베르젠데나 딱 베제베진 테마지 빵사오지로 양계계요 말에 공부 돌버 레전데라 명문바 타와든도 가시 양 람록스기래서 와덴데로지 이 라르미게 와서 빵선 되나랑 차바메 수기래 어디 때 차버자서 치미데 와라 빵와 셰자고 라서
Once one has thereby attained a remedial path and has utterly annihilated negative tendencies, the seeds for these disturbing emotions to arise again will henceforth not arise. This is called discarded. So, when we speak about what it means that the disturbing emotions are completely abandoned, then this is to, like, usually when we recognize the disturbing emotions and recognize their faults and so forth, then we will try to eliminate their potential to arise again. And so we give rise to the antidote against those disturbing emotions in our mind. And what we refer to here as abandonment is really the complete abandonment, that they never arise again. When we now study and reflect about the disturbing emotions, then we might recognize them when they come up, and we might be able to apply an antidote here and there. But we are not able to completely eradicate the disturbing emotions completely as ordinary beings. That is the case then only when they're complete. So then we don't speak about their abandonment, the thorough abandonment. We only speak about the disturbing emotions to be abandoned when they're completely uprooted, when they're completely eliminated and they cannot arise again. So this is what we're referring to here in that passage in when we speak about the discarding or having discarded them. And this is something that happens gradually, actually. When we look at the path of cultivation, the remaining discards, the remaining afflictions on the path of cultivation, they will be gradually discarded over the course of the 9 bhumis, starting with the more coarse ones. And so first the coarse, the bigger, and then the bigger middling, and so on, to the more and more subtle forms of the remaining discards. So they gradually abandoned until they do not arise anymore at all. And so on the path of, like, when we look at the different aspects of the bhumis, we have the path of no obstacle-free aspect, and then the remedial path. And so this is where the realization on the remedial path is when the antidote is that which flourishes, which shines forth. And just like the sun, when the sun shines, then the fog and the mist of the night dissipates. Likewise, when the antidote develops for a particular level of afflictive emotion, then the discard will be completely eliminated. So when this happens, when a certain affliction is being eliminated like that through the shining forth of the antidote, then this actually means that the discard has been completely eliminated in the 3 times. How so? The discard, the afflictive emotion of the past, has already ceased. And here, this is the explanation of the Abhidhamma Samujaya. We have to keep in mind, we're following here the Abhidhamma Samujaya explanation. So the past doesn't exist anymore because it has already ceased, so it has no power. That one is gone. The past disturbing emotion is gone because it has already ceased. The future one has not yet arisen, so it doesn't exist. It has no power to function. And the present one is the one that is being eliminated. So that one isn't there anymore either. So since the affliction in all 3 times doesn't exist, then it will be completely eliminated. So we can say that the disturbing emotion or that particular discard then has been completely eliminated or discarded at that point without any opportunity to ever arise again. So it will not arise in the future. This is the explanation of the Mahayana that we've already seen before. Once the discards are eliminated, they are not coming back. There's no way to fall back from a higher bhumi to a lower bhumi. That would mean that the discards would come back, right? It is impossible that if one has reached a 3rd bhumi, that one falls back to the 2nd bhumi, or that it's completely unheard of that a 6th bhumi bodhisattva falls back to the 5th bhumi. It's not accepted in the Mahayana that generally that this happens, as we have seen. So whether we talk about the path of seeing, so from the point of view of having reached the level of a noble being, or the path of cultivation, that is the same. If once something has been completely abandoned, discards have been completely abandoned, then there's no coming back. That means that the practitioner who has accomplished that level will not fall back to a lower level. Not from being a noble being to an ordinary being, but neither falling back from a higher realization or higher level to a lower one. And so when, according to the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, again, we look at ordinary beings of the form and formless realms, and one can talk about the discards of the path of cultivation that the beings of the form and formless realms have abandoned. And then clearly, according to the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, this is not the full abandonment. We cannot say that I have really discarded the disturbing emotions completely, because they're just temporarily suppressed. So that's not the real deal. And then if you look at just compare it slightly to the Abhidhamma Kosha, the view here is again the same. We already spoke about this before, because there is some decline that is possible for some noble beings. The idea about the path of seeing is the same. So one cannot become a noble being and then later fall back to being an ordinary sentient being. That is impossible. So one cannot reverse the path of seeing. But from the two kinds of practitioners, those of sharper faculties and the ones with duller faculties, only the ones with the sharper faculties are certain to progress through the path in a straightforward line, so to not fall back. But those of duller faculties might have only temporarily suppressed some of the subtler obscurations or subtler disturbing emotions, and then there's this bouncing back that might happen for those noble beings of the Shravaka path of duller faculties.
Yang chö tam je domba la tam be namba yila chebe me da so namba chenja de ngando tardu de yeje de nawe mumba dar nyomong be sabun jombara chedo sondu and then they do that non tolan non to yonde an chö tam je toni to gre es nge je shigro ne chö tam je toni kan to bar jigre chö tam je dombe sonsha do also doje tamje metaba saje tamje tungalo cho tamje tongje dame ma nyangale de hewa la so de ne song cho yong zu ba tamje ran me ba cho yong zu ba tamje ge ta ga so nga ran zo ji le ni zin ge ta sha ba na sin do den ba chu ba kha me ba den de ji na ba ne ta me ba na ba la dom do yo re ta nyen de da ran je ji rejin den zo ji kan sa ge ta me ba zo khan lo dom do re an te go chen ba rejin de 당면 니가기 뭐로 domdo고요. dom다 중사에 메로샤도 와. 덴데지 dombe 돈에 남아 일에 제용도 아니 디토교네 메다바도 동바도 당 메발라서 저 용조라시 메도 도도래 마도바 카시라시 여보도 카시라시 메보도 덴데 용거요 말에. 법은냠셔 예시지 강을 레비용도 한거 진바 가릴 하되어서는 가야 하고요 말에. 돈은 ben다 돈은 예시지 뭐 강을 레비용도 다 돈은 예시지당 고방제 좀 방차여 말에 공방도 좀 뭐뭐 하대요. 이나갑디도 공방 원주로 여러벨만 요 말에. 그래서 전바 가야 매봐. 디갑도 남도 가야 요 말에. 근데 인도 아니 저 탐제 아니 다음 베기 남바 일레진도 아니 저 탐제 하시면 뭐 갑디도 뭐지 뭐네 도사래 쓰기래. 아니 다 년도다 한절지르진 된지 주반 하신도 강사기 다음에 저 탐지는 모두 강사기 다음에 남발로 뒤네 강사 다음에 용도 도도요래 저기 다음에다 중자 치마도 도도기 말아와 미도 바라는 되게 말해 파비 강사인지 도요래 dende yele chibu kandar tonglam top yundu zana tongbang ngor gyubu nyomo tamche meba chang rugu yore gongbang rembe cho yundu sozo ki ngor do gyurbu pangja yundu rembe meba chang rugu yore pena nima shar yundu momba meba chaba nanshin resa tat pe tarang la song shadwa nangmin rete yore sangen rauji rete yore dende nyingzen nanshin chang rugu yore chi yore chi meba chaydu ngobe chonyi rwa asa dende song min rola
Yes. Moreover, in order to master all phenomena, attentiveness to the mental image of no self within the state, that state, also brings all other mental images, such as impermanence, to completion. Thus, this attentiveness overcomes the seed of disturbing emotions, just as light overcomes darkness. So, when the path of cultivation when the path of seeing is accomplished, then usually we describe this as the realization of the emptiness of all phenomena, the realization of the nature of all phenomena. That includes the two types of self for the Mahayana, realizing the two types of selflessness. And all the different characteristics, like the fact that all compounded phenomena are impermanent, and so on, up to selflessness, these are all also realized when that direct realization of the two types of selflessness or emptiness takes place. All mistaken grasping, so the mistaken grasping to duality is dissipated. And so that is the wisdom that arises at that moment. That's the insight at the time of realizing the true nature of phenomena. For the Hinayana, this means that one realizes the selflessness of person, and in the Mahayana, that means that one realizes the two types of selflessness. And one really realizes, like from the Mahayana perspective, then one really realizes all the aspects that go along with that, all the grasping to permanence, why things are impermanent is gone, and so on. So all of that is realized through the primordial wisdom of the meditative absorption of a noble being. And that's the first, in the path of seeing, is the first moment of that, the first time that this primordial wisdom in the meditative absorption of a noble being arises. And so not everything has been completely abandoned, like not all discards have been completely abandoned forever if that primordial wisdom in the meditative absorption of a noble being arises for the first time. But in the moment of that realization, these discards are not manifest because there's no grasping whatsoever in that meditative absorption. There's no conceptual thinking of misinterpreting reality. So we can speak about the essence of that realization having been realized. So the very essence, the very nature of that primordial wisdom has arisen. For the Shravaka path, this means that the selflessness of person has been has really been realized, fully been realized, and we can't even say that they do not understand or they don't realize the selflessness of phenomena at all, but they don't completely realize it because they're the smaller aspects, the more subtle aspects of the selflessness of phenomena that they don't understand or that they don't realize. But from the Mahayana perspective, it's the two types of selflessness, like the emptiness of a phenomena that is completely realized at that point. The only difference then throughout the path of cultivation is the level of clarity, the level of detail, or the intensity of that realization that still changes, that develops. But the realization itself has arisen on the path of seeing already. Dana, datang sa lalipso.
Ako duwe.
Datang ikang bagang lalipso.
Naso.
Kamachi gorge de poda ne nang pado.
Naso. Take ko duwe la. Naso. Nyembo re doa. Nyembo sharu nyembo no pangwe do she ba secondary do. Ta nyembo namba shi yue sa. Jir nyembo la shi de sun jimbe nyembo ne sajen namna nyemik su tawa wo sa. Sun jimbo sa da. Naso namnyu 소소기 논주당 견정서 제 하고이나 때는 맨 겨바쇼 좀 제대로 다 드링도 데 노송 투송 템바도 에네 사제제 최된 종문에 닝바 매바 템보 매바 주르 쳐진 누유 쳐진 가야 다된 매바 된데 하고 와도 엔 뇽모 받은서 좀 동알게라신 동알기 규데 롱서 쳐봐이나 강야 뭐도 냥거보다 예명당 견다 된서 하고 와데 에네 순지문이 뭐래 쓰리여서 님은 또
And now we come to the remedies, or the antidotes. In general, there are 4 remedies. First, the remedy of remorse is to regard all that is defiling as shortcomings. So first comes the remedy of remorse, or regret. And that we often have when we do any kind of mistaken action, right? When we do mistakes, when we engage in negative actions, then we think, oh, this was really not okay. This was really too bad that I did that. I shouldn't have done that. This shouldn't have happened. That's the feeling of remorse or regret. And so the remedy of remorse is that with regard to the actions, but also to recognize the defiling nature of the defiling phenomena, the deceiving nature, the fact that they give rise to afflictive emotions and so forth. When we know those faults, these shortcomings of the defiling phenomena, then that will give rise to remorse towards them. And then also when we know the afflictive emotions for what they are, we know their essence, we know that they are creating suffering, they're the causes for suffering, they're the nature of suffering. And so knowing their faults, knowing the shortcomings, is then this remedy of remorse.
So ane tanyeba pungwenyembo redo pungwenyembo ne barje mebe jorwa dan barje melam thamje do tadi nyomong boje nyembo mama derwa kongro ji kege no kongro ji nyembo da kandar tonglam meje da konam meje ngozu gyula ba da ge yu gyu ge ba dang bo ge la ko chari che go ro namsang la zo lam sho ba da namsang tonglam gyula ge ge yo mare komna namsang ge mare ane 남 초남도 전남이 대감네 토남게 이제 자제셔도 그러와 어디지 자제 저러와 된도다 남 엄마 줄에 집이 내가디 아니 님 엄마 줄에 집이 가 된도디 사마데 가르셔도래 네 뽕이 뭐 인사
Dila de let's go. 남절람 de chedange thonamda komlam rangla gogiro
다디 깨진 니바 차르레기래
alas
담보 바르젠 멜람 아니 남돌남
audi bachimilam di data data
안나디 바르젠
ane
멜람
bachimilam de choklam
뽕이
la
토놈 코는 다디 깨진 너도 잘라 셔초그래라 양 람갑소 양 디고라 깨질 레그래 담
di
님보
yanke
줄에 nimbo gyula kiwi kapsu parche me lamre nimbo gyula kena nyoma pang sin song na ene namro lamre kerang nyama shar ma shar di ne kapdi parche me lamine nyama shar na mumba salwa di namro lam ponye ta duzo chigla char chogore ngamchi han char chogore chigde nyambo re chigde nyambo la tharbi duzo re
Second, then comes the remedy of abandoning is all types of preparation for the path without impediment, as well as the path without impediment. So, when we talk about the remedy of abandoning, that is then the actual abandoning, the actual discarding. For example, of disturbing emotions like anger or aversion. So this is to prepare oneself for the arising of that primordial wisdom. When we talk about engaging in the path itself, the path without impediment, then we can't just jump into that straight away. There needs to be a preparation that leads up to that. So that's then the preparation for the path without impediment. And then when the antidote has completely arisen and the defilements have been eradicated, that is then the path without impediment. Now, this is something that we will talk about a little bit later. It will come again when we talk about traversing the path. But here I just clarified this. So we always distinguish when we between the preparation and then the path with, like the preparation for the path without impediment here and the path without impediment. One being the aspect of the antidote, of the application of the antidote when the antidote arises, and then the other one, the path without impediment, then refers to the stage of the realization having arisen and the discard having been completely abandoned. So they can even be looked at as two aspects to the same moment, where first the antidote arises and functions and then has functioned, right? And then the action is completed. So this is likened to when the sun just rises, when the sun is about to appear, and then the moment when it dispels the darkness, when the sun shines. So it's leading completely up to that moment, and then the sun arises. This is when there's the antidote present, and then then the time when one has been liberated from that defilement or that what needs to be abandoned, discard.
나서 되네 시암든지 예보데 남줄 남모스레 제디 다든지 예보데 남줄 남스도 동al 사나면도 녀mom바들 타마 타바서로 녀mom바들 메바 차마 타바 녀보 이제 줄을 깨바나 녀몸 메바 차도래 다코니 뒤감시 여러 여 말하려나 시작할라 가보시오래 미지 아마 차바당 가서 보고 깨바당 아마 잡아다 거 가ringa 말하려나 두선냐 말와 그 보고 깨바당 아마 차그라 아마 걸라래 보고 말하려나 아마당 보니 두선냐 말와 그에 보이긴 바당 그 강사디 디 아마 잡아도 두냐 말와 두선냐도 양지 저거도 와 남지양 용적이래 남지도 몰라더니 바제 멜람디 가서 그래 남들남 토베기 주 자리 등서 상마양 인적이래 근데 된지 통남 러시아 보이나 전남 인내가 된서 다 전남 저쪽 전부 내가 뒤 통남디 바제 멜람 멜람 되게 요래 통남 거치던 줄에 말해대 들어지 자기도 와 아니 당원도 저도 지금 어떤 저기 로그랑 올라 시야를 그러다 신도 저기 로도지를 잡아이나 돈을 시켜지 주루요 라고요 봐 돈을 시켜지 주루를 비도 당보 동al 동al 최소 세근데 계제 당보디 바제멜람 인스 그래 아니 가서 내내 송대 다 바제 지 잡아이나 동al 최소 내 송대 동al 최소디 바제멜람래 동al 제세디 남절람인스 아니 양대절 군중야 최소디 바제멜람래 군중 제소디 남절람 깨지 니니니니 깨지 주루요니 남 당보든 바제멜람 남절람 바제멜람 남절람 베레베레 데데 고깨지 림바 도다이나 데데 인스기 요래 남조기 로도이나 군들로라 데네 샤가요 마르와 군 돈을 메시아들라 이 깨지게 민다마도 뭐라 그 냠시 예시기 균직이 인도서는 개발체게 메시지로 와 아니 또나 군들로라 다 간데스 지고라세디 전남 초조 첨번이 내가디 나 돈을 메시 줄라 깨마 사바디 아니 바르멜라민 깨네 녀모 먹방 심바디 남전남래 다고 촉진은 깨진감지 매봐도 촉진은 먼저 다르게 깨진감지 효래데 이제 줄라 깨비 값은 남지 매봐래 아니 깨지 돈을 메시 당네 딱 사당부터 명으로 와 내내 산니바 마도기 버도 sama 산니바지 바르멜람래양 그 다르게 와 산니바 예시 줄라 깨 힘백값 되디 바르멜람 양인 쪽으로 남조남 양인 쪽으로 그래서 그 예시 뭐 깨바디 바르멜 예시인데 년봉 뭐마 들어와 년봉 뭐 줄라 깨바도 거기 방장 매바 차사래 남조남 양인 쪽으로 와 그래서
So actually I'm not entirely sure what I said before was entirely clear. So just to repeat this point about the path without impediment and the path of liberation actually. So the example with the sun is that of the point before the sun has completely risen. So when we talk about the rising of the sun, then there is this process from no sun to sun shining, right? And so the path without impediment is always the aspect of the antidote. That is the point of abandoning everything that has been abandoned, that has to be abandoned for the realization of the path of liberation, so of being liberated from those discards to arise. And now we move on to the next, what Kempela said. So Actually, when we then speak about here the remedy of the basis of support is the path of liberation. This is now this movement between, or this description of the two paths, of the path without impediment and the path of liberation. When we think about it thoroughly, it is hard to say, it's hard to say these are two different moments. We can count that as one moment, really, just as it is hard to say what comes first, the mother or the birth of the child. So when does a woman become a mother? When the child is born. But what comes first? Is she first a mother and then a child is born? The child is born, or is the child first born and then after, in a moment after she becomes the mother? No, actually, these two things, the birth of the child and the woman becoming a mother, they're happening at the same time. They're dependent on each other and they're simultaneous, right? So we can actually talk about them as simultaneous. And so in the same way, we can also speak about the path of without impediment and the path of liberation to be two aspects to the same thing, two aspects to the same moment of realization or leading up, that can be those two aspects present. So how that works generally is that when we talk about the path of without impediment, then this is what leads, is the moment of the realization of that next higher stage, or the previous moment when this has been accomplished. So the moment of the accomplishment of the higher stage of realization is then the path of liberation. Now, we will see this later again, but from the perspective of the Abhidhamma Kosha, it's actually easy to show a subsequential presentation of this. We said, like, when we look at the path of seeing, we said that according to the Abhidhamma Kosha, or the lower Abhidhamma tradition, there are 16 moments to the realization of the Four Noble Truths that describe the path of seeing. And so there we can say that the prior moment is the path of no impediment, or the path without impediment. So the acceptance of the truth of suffering, which then is followed by the knowing of the truth of suffering, and then the subsequent acceptance and the subsequent knowing. So we can always have the prior one is the path without impediment, and then the subsequent one, like the knowing of the phenomena, the knowing of the truth of suffering, would then be the path of liberation. So when we follow the Abhidhamma Kosha explanation of the 16 moments, it's actually easy to distinguish these two moments as subsequential. But if we follow the Abhidhamma Samuchaya, or generally the higher Abhidhamma presentation, we already said that the path of seeing is only named a moment for the sake of conventionality when we talk about it, but the realization itself is free of all constructs. So it's free from all conceptualization of time, of the three times, and so on. And so it really just is the realization of suchness itself. And so therefore, we need, like, we cannot really break down the path of seeing itself into the path without impediment, and then the path of liberation in terms of like breaking down different parts. We can say that everything that comes prior, like, or the moment that leads up to the path of liberation is the last moment of the path of joining the supreme attribute. And so the connection between that last moment and the next one then indicates this traversing between the path of no impediment to the path of liberation, which is then the path of seeing. And whenever we speak about the traversing, the moving from one bhumi to the next, this again applies, the same kind of principle applies. So when one is on the first bhumi, so having achieved the path of seeing, being on the first bhumi, then everything that leads up to the realization of the second bhumi is actually in preparation, or is abandoning all the impediments, all the defilements that prevent the arising of the second bhumi. And so when the antidotes have fully arisen, so the discards, the obstacles or the discards of the second bhumi, the obstacles to the second bhumi have completely been eliminated, then the path of liberation, so that is then the being free of those discards, arises. That is what is identified as the moment of achieving of the second bhumi. So we can say everything that still includes the path of liberation of the first bhumi, because the realization of the first bhumi has been obtained, right? So while it's the path of liberation in terms of the first bhumi, everything that comes after the realization of the first bhumi, it's also the path of preparation, or the preparation for the path without impediment for the second bhumi. So, and then this continues every time through the bhumis, and the path of liberation is always attained when the path without impediment is achieved. So when the antidote has fully arisen and the discards for the next bhumi have been completely eliminated. Okay, so let's probably stop here for today. And let's dedicate together.
Sonam de damje zebani tome nebe dana bamje ne kega naje bala drobai sebe zole droa doraj chamjo zemjo remboje Maje banam je gyurji, yeba nyamba mebaya, konde gondo belwara shu. Lazo ani kuzo doja na, tuna jema jaran namba kegen ngoma pebyung gre, eni towa jene jalrona.
So please, everyone, take care of yourselves, and next week you will your actual teacher will come back, and please happily welcome him back. Lasso kempulat ngone semtini tuchina tuntani gering la kadanki unjeta ganz bisschen am chembore kadanki sunje shuto beade. I was just thanking him for subbing and saying we were very fortunate to receive his teachings for the last 1.5 weeks. Okay, so on Monday we're back to Lama Dopgyu Tendar. And then we're probably going to speed up a little bit in the text again. So please be aware of that. again, this is Friday. No more review classes on Friday, so I wish you all a happy weekend. I did post the reading, which has to do with what we did so far, the discards. So please read the Kosha and the Samuchaya passages. And on Monday, there will be the quiz. Yes, Moon?
If we have questions for today's class, can we still send the questions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah.
Just
I will
making
have
sure.
to. I have to explain Lama Love what Kempela said in order to ask the question. But yes, maybe it's
Thank
also
you.
something I can clarify.
Yeah, yeah.
If it's something very specific, I will clarify with Kempela himself.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So have a
Turkchen
nice
Ang. Thank you.
2 out of 13 done. Congratulations, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.